Sidu Ponnappa is the co-founder and CEO of Realfast, an AI transformation platform for IT services companies. He's previously served as CIO of Gojek Singapore and MD of Gojek India after his Bangalore-based software engineering firm C42 was acquired by Gojek in 2015. Sidu is also a well-known voice in the AI ecosystem today. In this episode, Sidu breaks down how AI is reshaping the IT services industry, from disrupting traditional business models to driving faster, more efficient delivery. He explains why mid-sized companies are at the forefront of AI adoption and dives into the practical challenges of implementing AI at scale.
Welcome to the episode today, Sidu.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Perfect. We'll get started with, where should services companies today, in your opinion, leverage AI? Do you think certain size companies are more suited to do it versus others? Want to start off with thoughts on that from you first?
Absolutely. Look, I think that's a great question, and I'll take the second one first, and then we can talk about the first. I think in terms of suitability, I think the reality is that AI is going to completely change how IT services is executed and delivered over the next 5 years. In my mind, that's an inevitability. So I don't think it's about mid-size, large. It's going to happen everywhere. I think the real question here is, where is it going to happen first? And I think what we have to look for over there is, what are the tailwinds which are pushing the change forward? And we can already see early signs of this. If you look at if you just track the keywords and the buzzwords in the industry, you can already see AI transformation start to pop up alongside digital transformation, which has been like a core concept for the last couple of decades. You can already see AI transformation starting to grab mindshare. And you can see companies talking to their customers, IT services companies talking to their customers about the importance of going AI first. I think one of the most mature white papers on the topic is over a year old now from Infosys. They have this really very well-crafted white paper around the AI first maturity cycle. And I think the more interesting question which came up in my mind after reading that paper is, this is great for end customers, but what about the IT services companies themselves? And the question is not particularly original in the sense that Infosys asked it themselves, because they said, look, what credibility does an IT services company have to sell AI transformation to its customers if it is not already gone through that AI transformation process itself? So I think that tailwind is there, but the headwinds for this are, this is the innovator's dilemma. We know for sure that generative AI applied to a vast set of workloads within IT services will accelerate. That's very clear, right? The degree of acceleration will vary depending on the workload. But the interesting thing is, if you look at any workflow, if you accelerate every task in the workflow by 10 to 20%, you start to see very interesting compounding effects, which far exceed the individual productivity on any one task. And this is because so much time is spent waiting. A team finishes a piece of work, it goes to the security team for review. The security team is centralized, so now there are 20 teams they are serving. So now your output is sitting, waiting there for days, right? Now, what happens is, when you start accelerating everything 10, 20% task by task, the biggest lift in velocity is going to come from the reduction in those wait times. You will see a dramatic drop in bottlenecks in the most time expensive parts of the system, resulting to an overarching improvement of several fold in the delivery velocity, right? This, I think, is going to be inevitable. But the challenge is that in attempting to adopt the new processes and technologies required to do this, one, you're going to put your existing delivery at risk. Two, if you definitely have that clarity that you want to commit to this and you want to be at the forefront of this, the next question that you end up asking is, look, I've got committed revenue already. Now, if I accelerate this delivery, what is my incentive to mess with committed revenue? Right? My revenue is renewed on a yearly cycle, maybe a 2-year cycle, maybe a 3-year cycle. Before the end of cycle, I have no incentive to go mess with that. And this headwind, I think, is going to dramatically slow down adoption by incumbents. And what that means in my mind is we are going to see the tailwind only play out really quickly where the headwind does not exist, which is where you're looking at, mid-sized companies that are hungry for growth, that are not already well entrenched among Fortune 1000 clients, which are looking at growing a vertical very rapidly. These are the companies who are going to be willing to take the risk required to differentiate themselves. Because in this business, this is not a question of finding a customer who doesn't have a vendor. I don't think that any Fortune 1000 company does not already have a bunch of vendors empaneled. This is a question of saying that how do I convince my customer to switch from a much larger, much more visible brand to me? And I think that is where we are going to see the first set of changes happen. Of course, the exception to this, uh, which I personally think is a lower probability, is that there are billions of dollars of budget already committed to adopting AI in IT services. I mean, Accenture is on the record having committed 3 billion, and they've spent 2.1 billion of it already. But I think it's an entirely different kettle of fish. If you look at how these budgets are being spent right now, they're all being spent in developing manpower capabilities. Right? You will see all of these companies now aggressively hiring data experts, AI experts, chief AI officer, stuff like that, which is a totally legitimate line of attack. But that's a whole different ballgame from saying that, look, this is now for the first time, weirdly, a technology problem. Ironically, if we think about IT services and take a step back, we'll realize that IT services has never been a technology problem. It's always been a manpower problem. Right? The technology adoption comes from elsewhere. And what I believe we are sitting at the cusp of now is the equivalent of the industrial revolution of IT services, because this is the first time legitimately automation exists, which can reason and make decisions, which earlier only a human being could. And I think that is why I give less probability, because I do not currently see deep R&D spend to build a technology solution around AI out of the large players. What I do see is massive spends on developing AI capabilities to sell those services to end customers. So my sense is there is an outside possibility that there are R&D efforts which are not very obviously in the public domain. And someone is going to turn around and show up tomorrow with a AI platform which they are running entirely internally, right? And then that gives them this insane competitive advantage where they're executing projects, 2x, 3x, 5x faster than their competition. And that triggers the arms race. That, pushes us over that cusp of the innovator's dilemma. But I give that a lower credence. What I think is more probable is you're going to look at the hungry, mid-sized companies that want to win revenue away from incumbents, large incumbents, that will take the risks required to make these changes.
Hypothetically, Sidhu, if someone were to have built that platform to accelerate all their deliveries, or even if, let's say, a mid-sized firm puts in the effort to figure out, hey, here are the types of workloads we're going to accelerate using AI, and start doing that. Is this going to lead to also a business model change, given so far we've just operated on time equals money? Does it need to be different for the new world?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's a very interesting question because, you will see this like three distinct models in the industry that often come up, right? Like you have your classic time and materials, billable hours, you pay as you go for time used. You have your fixed cost, fixed scope, fixed price model where you say, listen, I commit to this scope, and then managing the time is my problem as the vendor. And then you have the last one, which is the most exotic, which is outcome based. Now, outcome based has always been challenging because, except for a tiny subset of customer problems, it is impossible to triangulate in and quantify the outcome delta. And even if you do, the comfort level on the customer side to say, listen, no matter what that outcome delta is, I am now willing to expose that quantity to you, expose those numbers to you, and then commit to paying you a percentage of those numbers. Does it happen? Of course it does. But is it the norm? No, because it's very, very complex to navigate. And then in the worst part of all of this is, I think, like we've all been around enough to know that with these kinds of projects, I mean tech projects, the probability of delivering an outcome is not in the builder's hands, right? At best, we have like a loose correlation. I mean, there's a reason why, our companies are venture funded, right? Software products and attacking problems using software is a very, very risky business. Now, it's one thing if I know that I have a robust methodology where I can repeatably generate outcomes. But when you're building software, everything from did I get the right requirements to was this the right solution to solve those problems to are there externalities that messed with the outcome completely, right? Interest rates changed. I had committed to an outcome on XYZ revenue number. Those didn't get met because interest rates changed. Why would I, as a vendor, commit to that? So, are there exceptional scenarios where vendors would be willing to commit to outcome based and it can actually be made to work? Yes, but I believe those are the exceptions. I think the norm, the meat of the industry is sitting in time and materials and fixed price. And this is a polarizing question because I think it comes down to the nature, complexity, and dynamic of the work that's executed. There's certain kinds of work where either the work inherently because of its nature is predictable, and therefore it is wise and responsible to commit to a fixed price engagement on a fixed scope. Or as a vendor, I have inordinate experience managing those risks. So there are some firms, large firms, who actually will go and sell a fixed price engagement to their end customer and then outsource that to an offshore vendor on a time and materials basis, literally to a staff augmentation model, and then arbitrage the delta. And that comes from a wealth of experience project managing that kind of work, where they say, look, we know how to de-risk the delivery. So we know that we can hit our commitments, right? And therefore, we will charge more and we will make very good margins on that and we will subcontract that out. And interestingly, like TCS, for example, was over 50% fixed price in the mid 2000s itself. Now, my sense is that with the adoption of AI, time and materials is slowly going to fade. The reason why time and materials is still such a core part of what we do. And I mean, I ran a firm before this and I was death on fixed price. I would never touch a fixed price engagement. And the reason for that is very simple. Execution takes enough time and has enough variables that crop up in that timeline that the overarching timeline is very unpredictable, right? So for time and materials companies today, they are time and materials because they are saying that, look, that risk cannot be easily quantified and then capped. And therefore, listen, we can't own that risk. But a significant amount of that risk comes from the slow feedback cycle because it just takes time to build. Now, what happens if instead of going through a requirements gathering process, then baking that into a contract, then doing, committing to a customer that there will be a 6-month milestone, we'll do a UAT, we'll take your feedback. I can just engage with a customer and turn around a prototype in 4 hours, right? And the customer's like, I like this, I don't like this, I like this, I don't like this. And you've turned around the next iteration again in 4 hours. The moment you do that, a huge amount of that risk just evaporates. You deliver faster, fixed price becomes feasible. This is really my point. So my sense is, A, time and materials is going to fade simply because the moment you have AI augmenting humans to do delivery, now what are you billing for? Your billable hours will collapse. That is one. But the other part of it is time and materials exist because we can't quantify that variability because of the long cycle time. And so instead we bound it by doing, contracts and negotiations and all of that. But if you crunch that cycle time, confidence goes up. Very weirdly, like this was a interesting thing call out, like in the ecosystem, the AI ecosystem. It's always been cool now for the last year and a half to show AI building an app. And those apps are always shallow and trivial, and there's good reasons for that. But a paddleball app or some quick CRUD app, something very simple, right? And the you can see deep down the aspiration is that what we call make a wish, get an app, right? I want to write a prompt and I get an entire application out. And the joke I have is this is nothing new. This has existed for 4 decades. It's called an IT services company. You hire an IT services company, you go write a prompt, and you get an app. You just don't realize it because the cycle time is 6 months, 12 months, and there are all of these complicated steps for risk mitigation in between. But if you eliminate all of that complexity that comes because of that cycle. And you look at what's happening there. Customer comes, writes a prompt, gets an app. And that's what we're aiming for here.
Absolutely. That's a interesting way to look at it. And what I heard similar things yesterday from a gentleman I was talking to, works in a database company, but the services team over there, where he was talking about how the porting or migrating from other databases to theirs has become, instead of like a 6 month exercise, like a 1 month exercise now, and that's leading to more business because more people are willing to make that lift.
Of
When
course,
the timeline is crunched, it feels like, hey, we can
less
get this
risky.
done. And
Yeah, it's just
yeah,
less risky in
yeah.
your mind, right?
So probably likewise, with this shortening of the time between the prompt and the delivery, there's going to be more projects, though the size of a project goes down. There's going to be more interest in making things happen because people can see that, hey, if this can be delivered in a couple of months, then it's worthwhile putting in that effort behind it, and creating one more system for something, right? So
Right.
I feel the volume of work can go up when
It,
people
it,
start experiencing their delivery.
in fact, when, in a different life, when I was in IT services, like proper systems integration, we had this running joke that 90% of the projects we were executing was migrating an Excel sheet into an application, right? The customer's been solving a problem on Excel. They've been solving it on Excel for years. Now they genuinely believe that their Excel solution is so critical to the business that it's worth the investment of time and effort to migrate it into an actual application. Now, the thing is, if you just stop and think how many such Excel sheets are sitting around all over the world, which no one is going to touch because who's going to go through the process of commissioning a project to migrate that? But if you make it trivial, our thesis actually is that Jevons paradox kicks in hard. We are going to see an exponential jump in demand. Because now everyone is going to be like, yeah, let me just email this Excel sheet to an IT services company and I'll have an app back in a week.
Makes a lot of sense. That's the interesting way to look at it. And yeah, I do strongly believe that the demand is going to really increase. We'll flip to another side of this whole AI piece, right? Like we were talking about how the services companies can use AI for their own delivery, but a lot of new demand is also coming from opportunities because of the AI hype cycle that's going on right now, right? Like especially after LLM and people being exposed to Chat GPT, I think there is a push for, hey, we want to use AI in more ways within the organization, the AI transformation that
Yeah,
that you spoke of.
yeah.
What kind of new opportunities do you think are more realistic to work on today versus what is, feels just like, hey, this is going to be like a buzzword, a topic for a while, but not real outcomes for customers?
Look, I think the overarching at a thesis level, there is that I think there is absolute merit in looking at problems where there is a lot of cash flowing through that system. The system is manpower intensive. The system is completely text oriented. And because it is manpower intensive, it has and text oriented, there are problems of reliability and there are problems in profitability. This, I think, is a very logical starting point, right? Like, look at any workflow in your organization which meets these criteria, attack it with AI. Absolutely. But instantly, the moment, text, speech, whatever, multimodal, text, speech, image oriented. But the immediate thing that everyone jumps at will be customer facing stuff, support use cases, things like that. And I think as things are today, keeping an AI model or an agent set of agents built on top of an AI model on the rails in a manner where you are not generating infinite liability for yourself is a hard problem. That is genuinely a problem which is sitting on at the level at which a DeepMind or an OpenAI or an Anthropic are operating. It will take that level of talent. It will take that level of budgets. It is not something which you're going to do in an enterprise on a smaller budget without a bunch of PhDs sitting and tens of millions of dollars of compute. because the risk over there of liability is so high that you have a customer chatbot going and saying one wrong thing in a specific wrong way, and you can just blow everything up with that, right? So you have long tail risk with it, which I think makes it a dangerously unwise space to attack. There are exceptions to this. I think there are some exceptional teams out there which are attacking the problem successfully. But I also believe it is because the processes they are operating on, they have the product and technical capability to bound those processes in such a way that those steps of the process where there is massive tail risk go through a human layer before they go out to the end customer. And only the pieces which do not contain tail risk are pure AI or pure agentic. And for example, for us, that is a policy level thing that any output of an AI before it goes to production, because we are now putting tickets in production multiple times a week, right? Agent written code goes out into a customer's environment, their production environment. And from a legal perspective, it has to be reviewed and approved by a human being because there's no way to 100% guarantee that, it has not gone off the rails in some way, right? So the first level of filtration I would immediately apply is I do not think it makes sense to directly expose an internal AI product to your external customers. That's a very clear, hey, it's a risky, it is the kind of bet where, you're probably going to burn dollars. And then as you reach UAT, you're going to realize that, hey, you know what, there are edge cases which I can't give guarantees around. And that will never cross the finish line. Your CISO will never approve it. Your CIO will never approve. But outside of that, all of the internal use cases where the output goes to one of your own employees whose judgment can be trusted to review, I think are right. And I think within that, the even more interesting niche is what I alluded to first, because the common thinking in the industry always is like, look, I have a person here who does work X. Now it takes them whatever 60 minutes to do a task typically. Can I use AI and make it 30 minutes? But it's operations research 101 that you want to focus on the longest wait time. And these are operations research problems. If you look at that entire pipeline of work step by step, you want to look at where the wait times are the highest and attack that and prioritize attacking those because that is what will increase your overall throughput massively. And the last lens, again, the reason why we've picked IT services rather than technology teams in product companies as a target market for our solution is that you want to be attacking problems where productivity translates to dollars directly, right? If you're talking about a product organization and as an example, right, because it's relevant to us, the correlation between the productivity of the product development group and the revenue or margins on the product exists, but it's a very loose one. Just because I make the product development group 2x more productive, they're shipping features 2x faster, does not mean that you're going to see a directly correlated impact on the product's revenue, margins, any of those metrics. Whereas in a services business, productivity translates to dollars directly. It's a straight correlation. So that would be the third aspect of prioritization applied to problems, where whichever group is being targeted for acceleration using AI, the productivity benefit delivered to that group translates into very clear top line or margin improvements, unambiguous. These would be the kind of axes I would look at to pick problems to attack.
And I remember when we spoke about this earlier, you were also talking about some of the hurdles, challenges, difficulties in delivering production quality AI enabled or AI first applications. And I thought it was like an interesting perspective on where things are from a maturity standpoint. Would love to
Right.
have your comments on that for the audience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. When we're talking, I mean, that's my favorite analogy. So I'll just, use that. I think that generative AI solutions, especially, we are currently very loosely, the analogy would be to the early days of web applications. The late 90s, the early 2000s. CGI, FCGI, maybe servlets, if you want to go that far into that period, right? The reality is that there are no large scale AI based applications that are in production in volume. Do a few really amazing companies have stuff running? Yes. But right now, when you look at the ecosystem, all of the frameworks, the tools, everything are designed largely top down. They're designed top down and they're designed based on certain assumptions about what works and what doesn't work. And there are two problems with this. Just like in the bad old days of enterprise Java beans in the early 2000s, these frameworks are not clearly targeted. And a lot of the assumptions they make are either wrong because they are just plain wrong, like those assumptions don't hold. Like a favorite of mine is um, frameworks designed assuming that goal setting for agents will be autonomous or semi-autonomous, or that agents will be long-lived. Like the problem we are solving for agents is memory, right? Whereas what we are finding is for our use cases, and I'm not saying those are wrong frameworks. I'm saying what we are finding is for our use cases, much more focused, short-lived micro agents, which do not significantly adjust their goals, right? Goal setting is algorithmically determined. We look at a problem, analyze it in a more traditional algorithmic way or a machine learning way. And based on the categorization and classification of that specific task or problem, we then pick a specific set of goals. And then depending on the feedback loop, again, the same classification happens, picking another set of goals. That is the way that we are getting better, significantly better outcomes. My point in all of this is the ecosystem is still so new that we are yet very far away from a framework which is extracted from a mainstream production use case. I think in those days, it was like what, 6, 7 years before you saw Rails, Django, and then Spring, which became like the de facto standards for web applications because by then everyone understood. Look, web applications, we are all comfortable with the idea that there's going to be a modular viewer controller, there's going to be cross-cutting considerations around logging, authentication, blah, 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 blah. And each of those frameworks had a reasonably sensible solution to that. Yes, they may have differed in the specific solution, but it was a far cry from like 5, 6 years before that, where you're just fooling around with servlets or EJBs, and it was just this horrible kludge that turned everything into a mess. And I think we are still in those very early nascent phases. And the other part of it, which I think is very immature, is how do we expose relevant tools to the LLM? Yes, we are function calling, but what is the framework level solution to function calling to give LLMs access to underlying tools? Like for example, for us, we build very heavily our first vertical that we are targeting is Salesforce implementation services. And Salesforce is a very rich platform with a whole gamut of tools, which are used by every person in the development team, right, from project manager onwards. And each of those things now has to be selectively exposed to the agent, so that the agent can say, "Oh, I need to write a unit test for a particular type of object. What fields does the object have?" Now, looking up the fields on the object is a tool which has to be provided to that agent. And then like this, there will be 3, 4 steps where the agent starts building up the context before starting off on the task. Exposing all of those tools in a robust, reliable fashion, again, is an unsolved problem. And I think it's the combination of these factors that says that this space is not commoditized. This is still, I would say, a minimum 2 years, more realistically 5 years away from being in the domain of a systems integrator. This is still very much like saying, I am building a SaaS startup in 2002, right? Like my technology is not a solved problem, right? In 2024, a systems integrator can trivially, robustly, reliably be depended on to build a web application with appropriate integrations. In 2002, you couldn't even dream of this. It was a problem for a hardcore engineering team with very, very deep considered opinions on design, both customer facing as well as architecture. and very strong capabilities on optimization of the stack, because none of this stuff was commoditized. And I think my sense is, as I said, maybe 5 years before we can say, oh, let me outsource this project to a systems integrator to build a AI product for me.
Very useful analogy, and puts things in perspective. Um, we moved to the last section of our podcast now, Sidu, and it's sort of a rapid fire type section. We have just 3 quick questions for you to for this episode.
Yep.
First one is, what's a movie or book that you recommend that is close to your heart?
Now this is the kind of question where I'm like, okay, which of 50 do I pick? But I think my all-time favorite is going to be The Matrix. That's the movie. And in terms of books, I think it's going to be Hanu Rajaniyami's Quantum Thief trilogy. Sorry, I'm a sci-fi buff.
Awesome.
Like you will see that come out on both.
Okay, this is a fun question I've been asking people. NVIDIA, buy or sell right now?
Buy.
Okay. Last one is, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs who are starting services businesses now?
Be very careful. 2 years ago, I was an entrepreneur starting a services business. And 5 months into that, ChatGPT dropped. And we started using ChatGPT very aggressively within the services business because we said, look, this is obviously a powerful tool. 2 months later, we realized this is not just a powerful tool. This completely transforms the unit economics and processes of services. So be very careful, because you don't want to end up in a situation where you build out 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 person organization on top of certain unit economics assumptions, only to have those blown out of the water as AI adoption progresses.
Thank you so much, Sidu. It was great hearing your thoughts on all of these topics. And
thank you so much for having me. It was a
today.
pleasure. Thank you so much.